Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're stepping into the war room for a premium strategic briefing on a truly historic military campaign, Eelam War IV. We're going to break down the absolute final phase of a brutal 30-year conflict in Sri Lanka. It's honestly a masterclass in modern asymmetric warfare, and the strategic lessons we can pull from it, they are profound.
So, here's the big question. The Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, you probably know them as the LTTE, they were this incredibly powerful, deeply entrenched insurgency, right? They fought a relentless war for 3 whole decades, but then they collapsed. And not just collapsed, but fell apart with staggering speed. How does a massive, battle-hardened movement that survived that long just suddenly fold? Well, that is exactly the strategic mystery we're investigating today.
Here's how we're breaking down the briefing dossier. 1. The collapse begins. 2. Preparing the battlefield. 3. A fatal strategic mistake. 4. The Eastern Campaign. 5. The Northern Encirclement. And finally, 6. Anatomy of the End. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The collapse begins. Weakening the foundation.
You know, the craziest thing is that the LTTE was actually fatally wounded way before the final military push even started. It was like a domino effect of disasters. First, the post-9/11 global war on terror really changed the game. International bank accounts were abruptly frozen, which choked off a staggering $4 billion in funding by 2002. Then, in March 2004, the movement suffered this catastrophic internal fracture. Commander Karuna Aman actually defected, and he took nearly 5,000 fighters right out the door with him. Just months later, the devastating December 2004 tsunami completely wiped out their infrastructure and naval assets. And if that wasn't enough, in August 2005, the LTTE assassinated a highly respected Sri Lankan foreign minister. That move basically vaporized whatever international sympathy they had left. So before the major battles even kicked off, this movement was completely bankrupt, bleeding manpower, and totally isolated on the world stage.
Section 2. Preparing the battlefield. Strategy and force structure.
Okay, so while the insurgency is crumbling internally, the Sri Lankan government is executing this incredibly deliberate peace-through-war strategy, and they built it on 3 massive pillars. First, politically, President Rajapaksa engineered what was called a jumbo cabinet. This basically created absolute political invulnerability, ensuring total unity on the home front. Then, diplomatically, they secured $1 billion in annual military aid from China, which effectively shielded them at the UN. At the same time, they successfully deterred Indian intervention and completely neutralized any pressure from the West. Finally, militarily, they went all in. They expanded the defense budget by an astonishing 40%. Army personnel shot up by 70%, they were buying advanced weaponry and raising entirely new, highly mobile fighting formations. They were literally gearing up for total war.
Now contrast that massive state machine with the LTTE. And here's the thing, you might picture a ragtag group of forest rebels, right? Actually, scratch that. They were a highly structured, almost state-like military organization operating straight out of the jungle. Right under their supreme leader, Prabhakaran, they had conventional infantry brigades like the Charles Anthony and Jathanthani units. They maintained specialized intelligence divisions and even elite suicide commandos known as the Black Tigers. And get this, for an insurgent group hiding in the dense tropics, they somehow built a functioning naval wing, the Sea Tigers, and even a rudimentary air force, the Air Tigers. It's wild. But here's the catch. Just because you have a conventional structure doesn't mean you can actually fight a conventional war against a rapidly modernizing state.
Section 3. A fatal strategic mistake. The tactical hinge point.
When you're massively outgunned, how you choose to fight is absolutely crucial. Historically, the LTTE survived by mastering guerrilla mobility, right? Hit-and-run tactics that took full advantage of the dense jungle terrain. But in this final war, they made a catastrophic tactical error. They actually switched to a static defense. They tried to physically hold ground using these fortified trenches, known as ditch-cum-bunts. The fatal flaw here? They committed to a fixed posture without having the necessary conventional armor or training to back it up. And they did this against an enemy whose military budget had just surged 40% to buy modern, devastating artillery. By locking themselves into fixed positions, they literally turned an elusive, highly mobile guerrilla force into a sitting target.
Section 4. The Eastern Campaign. Stage 1 of the offensive.
So, the physical ground defensive kicks off with this steady, methodical push downward along the eastern coast, moving from Trincomalee toward Batticaloa and Ampara. And remember Commander Karuna's defection we talked about? Well, this is where it became the absolute critical intelligence coup of the entire war. Because he took 5,000 fighters from this exact eastern region, the government suddenly had unparalleled operational intelligence. I mean, they knew everything. LTTE hideouts, defensive layouts, all completely compromised. Overwhelmed by this massive tactical advantage, the insurgent defenses just shattered. The entire eastern province fell to government forces by July 2007.
Section 5. The Northern Encirclement. Squeezing the administrative capital.
With the east completely secured, the government unleashes this massive, four-pronged attack straight into the northern province. We're talking 7 newly created fighting formations, including the 57, 58, and 59 divisions, all heavily supported by task forces, just driving right into the theater. Attacking relentlessly from the west, the south, and the north, the military executed this suffocating encirclement. Their main prize, Kilinochchi, which was the LTTE's administrative capital. They were systematically locking the insurgency into this inescapable geographic vice grip.
But crucially, this wasn't just a ground assault. It was total, multi-domain isolation. Up in the sky, the Sri Lankan Air Force was relentlessly bombarding LTTE camps and airstrips, penetrating really deep to take out insurgent leadership. At the exact same time, out on the water, the Sri Lankan Navy deployed these rapid-action boat squadrons. By using rigid-hull inflatable boats, they gained this incredible tactical advantage, allowing them to operate aggressively in extremely shallow waters. This naval blockade totally crushed the Sea Tiger's amphibious capabilities. It decisively cut the LTTE off from any hope of getting external weapons, money, or vital supplies. They were completely boxed in.
Section 6. Anatomy of the End. The Final Collapse.
The geographic compression of this battlefield was absolute. By stubbornly trying to hold static defenses against overwhelmingly superior firepower, and with their global supply lines completely severed, the insurgent footprint just violently collapsed. Between 2005 and 2009, the LTTE was methodically squeezed out of vast stretches of northern territory. Their entire area of control was compressed down into this rapidly shrinking, isolated sliver on the northeastern coast.
That final sliver became known as the Vani Pocket, and it was a claustrophobic, truly harrowing final stand. By late January 2009, you had about 15,000 surviving LTTE fighters forced to retreat eastwards into this tiny, desolate coastal strip just north of the Nanthikada Lagoon. Tragically, they took more than 300,000 civilians right in there with them, who became trapped in this chaotic, shrinking perimeter. Completely surrounded on all sides by multiple, heavily armed military divisions, the end was just mathematically inevitable. It was right there, in this exact pocket, that the Supreme Leader Prabhakaran was killed on May 18, 2009. That effectively ended the 30-year war.
So what's the core strategic takeaway from all this? Honestly, it wasn't just pure military might that won the day. It was profound strategic miscalculations by the LTTE. They completely failed to adapt to a fundamentally changed global environment after 9/11. They clung to terror tactics that isolated them on the world stage, and then they tried to fight a static, conventional war against a vastly superior, well-funded modern military. When you look at it that way, they really doomed their movement long before the government's final offensive even started.
For anyone studying military strategy, this campaign is practically the ultimate blueprint for modern asymmetric warfare. Step 1. Politics prepares the ground. You absolutely must build internal unity and secure your funding. Step 2. Diplomacy isolates the opponent. You leverage international alliances to cut off your enemy's access to money and weapons. And only then, Step 3. The military executes the operation. The ground forces are essentially just closing a trap that politics and diplomacy have already built.
Because war is never static, right? It constantly evolves as the world evolves. The LTTE ultimately fell because they were fighting yesterday's war in a brand new geopolitical reality. So in our current era of rapidly shifting global alliances and unprecedented new technologies, we really have to ask ourselves, how will the next irregular conflict be won or lost? That concludes today's explainer. Thanks for stepping into the war room with us.